Welcome back to Master Your Marriage. I'm Sharla Snow, and I am here with my incredible husband, Robert. And I am really glad to be back with you all today.
Yeah, and you guys probably don't even know this, but it's probably been what? Like
Over
a month since we've been sitting in these chairs in the studio.
Yeah.
We had, some vacation and trips planned. And so we had banked and pre-recorded 2-3 episodes so we could keep it coming out. But there's been a lot that's going on and a lot that's happened the last month.
Ooh, so where do we even start? It's been quite a month.
I don't know. We've had some things.
So this episode is going to be deeply personal because it's inspired by something intense that we went through back at the 1st of April.
Yep.
And Robert and I, as he said, we did a little vacationing. We were on a dream scuba diving trip in the British Virgin Islands, and we stayed on a live aboard catamaran.
Holy bucket list.
Holy bucket list.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we were scuba diving 1 to 3 times every day for this whole week, diving. It was incredible. We saw vibrant sea life. We explored several wrecks. But when we got off the boat, I started feeling really off, like really dizzy. Like everything was just spinning. And so I thought, wow, I mean, I've had seasickness. So maybe that's what's going on. And I just brushed it off. Like
when you get off of a boat, sometimes, especially if you've been on a boat, you start to feel a little bit motiony
wobbly
for a while. But instead of getting better when we got on land, like you'd expect a little bit of it, it just sort of kept getting worse, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a really long trip home. We had 2-3 legs and super long flights, and your symptoms actually didn't get better. They got worse after flying.
They did.
Yeah.
So if any of you are scuba divers, you probably know what's going to be what's happening.
You're already guessing.
I didn't yet, but
guessing what might have happened.
But it was rough. So by the time we got home, I was still dizzy, but now my arms and my legs were starting to feel weak, and I was really foggy. I felt kind of high or intoxicated. And at the time, I just chalked it up to being totally exhausted from the hours and hours and hours on the plane. And I just thought, man, if I can just get home to my bed, that's going to fix everything if I can get a good night's sleep.
Right. Usually it does.
But the next day, I noticed other symptoms. I started having cognitive and neurological symptoms. I was really forgetful. I couldn't find my words. Communicating was really hard. To have a conversation with someone, felt like every sentence was just a struggle to piece it together. And then we were with some friends, and it was just so overwhelming because my brain couldn't keep up with all the different conversations that were going on in the room.
Yeah, that was pretty tough.
Super scary.
And and of course she was in a room full of physical therapists,
mm-hmm.
and they're all looking at me, and I'm sort of looking at them as we see Sharla struggling to find words, and we're like, oh man, there's something going on. And it's difficult because Sharla's so very sharp. She's very quick. She's very witty. And it challenges me to keep up with her, when it comes to finding words and speaking. So it was really difficult to see sort of this change. And we knew that there was something that just wasn't getting better. And this was probably about just short of a week after we got back.
Yeah. So long story short, after urgent care visits and consulting with a cardiologist, I was diagnosed with decompression sickness, and it was caused from a small hole in my heart that I didn't know I had.
PFO.
Called a PFO, or how do you say it? Patent foramen ovale, I think is what it's
called. Patent foramen ovale.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Of course, you would know that.
Yeah, well, I'll own the medical terms over here.
So we'll call it a PFO because that's much easier. And they're really common, actually. I think 20% of people of the population have one.
A lot more common than I thought it was.
And usually for most people, it's not a problem. But when you're scuba diving, nitrogen bubbles can form. And in my case, they were able to shunt across this hole between the center of the heart and go into essentially my neurological system. So my brain, spinal cord. So as a result, it affected me neurologically.
Yeah.
And I've had to do these sessions, like 2-hour sessions for the last couple of weeks, every day, 2-hour sessions in the hyperbaric oxygen chamber where I'm breathing 100% oxygen. And this is where it actually gets really interesting and relates to our topic today. They gave me a cognitive test before doing any of the chamber.
Yeah, this is when we knew things weren't 100%.
So they gave me a test, and it's the same test that they actually give to carbon monoxide patients that have had carbon monoxide poisoning. And you do these little tasks like put numbers on a clock and then draw the arms to a certain time. You draw a 3-dimensional cube. You remember and repeat back like 5 words. And I did that. And
how'd you do on the test?
I failed it.
Oh, and I
bombed it.
remember you texted me. You were like, I'm so sad I failed the cognitive test.
Right. I couldn't remember the words that they asked me. I couldn't draw the cube. I was seeing what I was drawing and I could see that something was wrong with it, but my brain couldn't figure out how to fix it.
Yeah.
And
oh my goodness,
man, that was so frustrating. I don't know if you guys ever had something like that happen where you feel like your body or your mind is betraying you.
Yeah.
Super scary, really scary. And I just sat there and cried when I was trying to like do this test because I was so sad and so frustrated. And I felt like I was like losing my mind, losing a part of myself. And I was wondering, gosh, am I ever going to be okay?
Yeah. And seeing you struggle was so tough. And from the medical side, I knew your symptoms were neurologic.
Mm-hmm.
You acted like somebody who'd had either a stroke or post-concussive, which in the physical therapy world, we deal with a lot of post-concussive. So just some sort of a brain injury. And then, of course, we were afraid that, also with PFO, there's a likelihood of having a stroke. That's the other way that most people find out about it. So we're like, okay, did she have a small stroke? And luckily, with a myriad of tests and doctor's visits over the past month, the stroke's been ruled out. So everything is good. And so when it comes to that, it was tough, but at least we know that she was going to get better.
So anyway, after a couple sessions, 2-3 sessions in the chamber, literally this was now only a few days after I took that test, they gave me the test again. They gave it to me 2 hours later and then again, like the next day and the next day. And within a couple of days, I got a perfect score on the test.
Of course you did.
So I went from, that was important to me.
Yeah, I know. You dreamed about the test, which
I did dream about the test. I'm like, okay, next time I'm going to pass it. 3 days later, I aced it. And it was wild to see that change.
It's the beauty of this, of not only the human body, but just our brain. And it shows how resilient it really is. The brain can heal itself after these injuries and it can rewire itself, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I'm still recovering a little bit from a few minor symptoms. Basically, I'm back to normal now. But if I do slip up and I forget a word or I say the wrong word, Robert's here.
I'll bail you out. I got you, kiddo.
To bail me out. And I was pretty anxious, but this experience has given me a front row seat to be able to see just how amazing the human brain is.
Yeah.
How adaptable it is, how flexible it is, how it can heal by finding these new pathways that Robert just hinted to.
Yeah. And that's why we chose sort of this topic for today. Sharla's experience was the inspiration for this episode. And we're going to talk about the brain's ability to adapt and to change. And this is called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity has been known in the medical world for brain injuries since the late 1800s, and was actually a phrase that was first coined by Dr. Broca, who noticed that in younger brains, they tended to recover or heal faster. That was the extent of their knowledge. Interesting side note. He's also the person who coined the phrase Broca's aphasia, which when very serious, people have difficulty finding their words, which is to a small extent what Sharla had. But now we understand neuroplasticity a little bit different, especially when it comes to how we can adapt to changes in our personality, to changes in adapting the things that we want to do, and how we can build a better version of ourselves. So let's dive in, and that is a pun intended.
Let's dive in.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start back with my story again. Those tests that I referenced, they showed me how my brain was struggling after decompression sickness.
Yeah.
But also how quickly that it could recover.
So awesome.
So when I couldn't draw the cube, it was like my brain's old pathways were blocked. So this little route that it used to take to get to a certain place, now there was a roadblock that was there. And I could see what to do. Like when I was trying to draw the cube, I could see it, but I just couldn't figure out how to do it. It was kind of like, I think of it like train tracks, and train tracks are carrying information in my brain. And all of a sudden it came to an abrupt stop and new tracks had to be laid. I had to lay new train tracks to be able to get that information to that same destination in a different way. And so that's where the oxygen therapy came in, and it helped my brain to be able to lay down new tracks. And that is what Robert just said is neuroplasticity.
Yeah, it's remapping, not only remapping synapses, but remapping these neural connections within the brain in order to just allow all the processes to work. And the brain is amazing at doing that.
Well, why don't you actually talk a little bit, because neuroplasticity is right now, it's the name of the game in psychotherapy. I see it with my clients that I work with. Obviously, I've had a front row seat at it in my own brain recently, but I've seen how opening these new neural pathways can create massive behavioral differences and changes.
And that's the newer part that we're learning about neuroplasticity. First, we thought that it was, as we backtrack a little bit, first we thought it was, just about how the brain recovered from injury, which generally was our speech and our movement. If somebody had had a stroke and they lost the ability to use their hand for a while and then they were able to get that back, that's because we had new neural pathways and the brain just sort of remapped with a wonderful thing called neuroplasticity. So psychologists used to think that our character, the things that we did once we developed into like he's a rude person or an unkind person or whatever, they thought it was just sort of set in stone. And then we discovered neuroplasticity and we realized that with the right amount of input, and we're going to talk about those inputs, we know that we can actually adapt and change our character, the part that's deeply ingrained to us, our reactions. And we can open up new neural networks. We can restructure that. And this is the neuroplasticity, is our brain's ability to reorganize those connections in response to experiences. And one of those experiences that I mentioned, one of those triggers is that when we have this aha moment, or sometimes the body will sort of respond in this remapping of its neural network in response to injury, much like what Sharla's story did. Neuroscience shows us that we can create these new neural pathways actually rather quickly because the brain is always starting to just remap whenever there's this injury. And I saw that happen just as Sharla was just getting better. I saw just this remapping happening. Now, is it time? Is it healing? Is it the oxygen therapy? Like all of it, right? But one day, and actually it was probably just over this last weekend, I said something and Sharla made some witty comment and I'm like, and she's back.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
It made me smile. I was like, yes, I feel like me again. And he sees it.
You were snarky like you.
Right. And
which is me too.
And Robert was really amazing through this whole thing. There were many times that you just had to hold me and reassure me that we were going to get through it together. And that just reminded me of how grateful I am for our relationship, for our partnership, and what an anchor you are, what a rock you are for me to kind of
that's sweet.
Hold this together. But what I've also been reflecting on this past week is how my brain's recovery actually mirrors what we can do in our own relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just like my brain found new pathways to draw a cube, we can find new ways of relating to one another, to communicating with each other, to resolving conflict with one another.
So how do we do that? How can we intentionally use neuroplasticity to create change and build a better relationship? Neurobiologists and therapists tell us two things are needed to open a new neural pathway and change our behaviors. First, we need to make the unconscious conscious. Or as therapist Terry Real says, the implicit must become explicit. We all have these automatic behaviors and patterns that we do sort of without thinking, and we react instinctively in specific ways based on our conditioning and our upbringing. Often these automatic responses are maladaptive, meaning they're not really helpful to our relationship. Yeah. But when we wake up and become conscious of these patterns, it can lead to behavioral change by altering neural circuits.
Yeah. And in his book, you mentioned therapist Terry Real. He has a book called Us. Yeah. One of his new books, fabulous book. He shares a powerful example of just how fast we can change when we tap into neuroplasticity. So he tells this story of a husband, his name is Ernesto, who he describes as a rager. So not physically abusive, but a screamer, someone who is verbally abusive and really harsh and critical. And Ernesto even describes to Terry Real, he says, it's just something that just happens to me. It comes over me so quickly. I can't control it. It just happens. And so about an hour into their first session, Terry leans in and asks Ernesto, so who taught you to be nasty and mean?
Ooh, learning at the feet of the masters.
And Ernesto replied, well, I guess it was my stepmother.
Yeah.
Because I think his mother died when he was 7 or 8.
So Terry then asks, so she taught you how to be this nasty?
Mm.
He recoiled a bit and said, I mean, I guess so.
Mm.
And then he became visibly remorseful as he reflected on his childhood. And after a few minutes, Ernesto said, I'm actually embarrassed for someone to see me act the way I saw her act. Oh,
so
I know that feeling.
Terry didn't stop there. He pushed Ernesto further and he said, you know what? Do you have a picture of your stepmother? Well, yeah, at home. Well, the next time you're about to blow, before you do, I want you to take out her picture, look her in the eye, and I want you to say to her, I know I'm about to do harm, but right now being like you is more important to me than my wife is.
Ooh.
Well, Ernesto's head sort of snapped up and he barked out, that is not true. That would stop me in my tracks because my stepmother is not more important to me than my wife.
Absolutely.
Well, so they finished the session. Ernesto took his wife's hand. They left Terry's office. And you know what? He never raged again.
Yeah.
And when I read Ernesto's story, it hit me hard because I've had moments like that of seeing my own pattern, like my tendency to be harsh with you.
Right.
And feeling that shame of, oh man, I'm acting like someone that I don't want to be.
Right.
That's a humbling feeling, but it's also freeing because you can realize at that moment that you can choose a different reality.
So why was Ernesto's change so profound and so quick? We talked about these two things. Two things happened. First, the unconscious, this pattern running in the background, became conscious.
Yes.
Or as Terry Real says, the implicit became explicit. And Ernesto's rage was automatically tied to a hidden memory.
Yes.
And this memory of probably the way that his stepmother acted, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once he named it, his brain then could start rewiring it.
That's key. Right. Yeah. That's that moment that the brain was able to open up those pathways and say, okay, let's rewire something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes we need help seeing what we don't see. Oftentimes we need help seeing it. Our reactions can happen, like Ernesto described, so fast, so viscerally that we're blinded to them. We might need a therapist or a coach or a brave partner, your spouse, your husband, your wife, to help you to slow it down and to point out the pattern. But we have to be open to being able to taking in that feedback, which not everyone is, but Ernesto was open to taking that feedback in.
Yeah. And he was at sort of a pivotal moment in his relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And there was sort of the urgency and the desire to change. And then when he shined the mirror on him, that was enough.
Crack the lid.
Yeah. Crack the lid just enough. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Then so that was the first thing.
That was the first
unconscious thing. Has to become conscious.
Right. You got to bring that out of this autonomic reaction into like, wait a minute, this is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is emotional arousal, or what Terry Real calls recoil, which is an emotional shock or surprise from recognizing this harmful pattern.
Right.
This activates the amygdala, which then increases neuroplasticity. The amygdala releases chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine during these intense moments, which is like pressing sort of the save button on new neural pathways. It's why those aha moments are super powerful when it comes to eliciting change.
Yeah. And for Ernesto, realizing he was acting like his stepmother was that kind of gut punch feeling that you're describing.
Yeah.
That aha moment gave his brain the jolt that it needed to form new pathways. It's like, and just to use another example from scuba diving, since we're using that today, it's like when you see a shark. Yeah. The moment like, oh, whoa, there's a shark, or there's a giant barracuda, or this massive stingray or something. You see it and you're instantly on alert. And that's a moment that you can always go back to. You can never forget that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would suggest that maybe pointing out in the middle of a disagreement how your partner is acting like their mother might not be the best time to do that?
Right. This was in a setting with obviously a therapist who was able to lead him into that realization without being accusatory or blaming or being nasty.
Yeah. And I would say if you want information on that, just reach out to me. I'll tell you how that doesn't work.
Yeah. So the first thing you mentioned was the unconscious has to be made conscious.
Right.
And the second thing is there needs to be that emotional recoil or that emotional charge that helps to create those new neural pathways.
Yeah, exactly. And science, of course, backs this up. Bruce Eckert's work on coherence therapy is all about creating this transformational change through emotionally vivid experiences that sort of contradict existing beliefs. Mm-hmm. His research, along with books like Norman Doge's The Brain That Changes Itself, shows that these moments of shock or surprise can unlock and rewire these sort of implicit or unconscious memory systems.
Yes.
So we need that shock. We need to just like wake it up.
Yes. Then there's also additional research, and we're going to link to a bunch of this research in the show notes for those of you who want to dig in more to neuroplasticity. There's also the research on memory reconsolidation. A neuroscientist by the name of Joseph Liddell has shown that when you recall a memory, this is really fascinating, that memory that you recall becomes flexible for a few hours, and it can take in and change and take in new information. You can add new information. For example, you might take in a new way, a calmer way to be able to handle anger. Yeah. So it's like your brain gets a window to be able to rewrite the script.
Okay, let's apply this to Ernesto's story. Through therapy, he had one of those aha moments where he clearly saw this unconscious pattern that he had running in the background. He realized that he had mirrored his stepmother's behavior. That was sort of this aha, the first step of change. This caused an emotional response, the shock, like, holy crap, surprise and remorse, which was the second key part of creating a behavioral change. So he brought the unconscious, made it conscious, and he had the emotional shock to go with it. And now his brain is perfectly set to let the amygdala work, dopamine and norepinephrine. Let's hit the save button on a new pattern.
Beautiful. And then after that aha moment, there's actually a window. Okay?
Yeah.
There's a window of time where you're in an ideal state for this rewiring to happen, to be able to rewire new behaviors. The research on this time frame isn't 100% clear on how much time we have exactly this window stays open, but memory reconsolidation studies suggest that it's about 4 to 6 hours. So once those two things that Robert described happens, there's about a 4 to 6 hour window to act on whatever those insights are. Very Real talks about it. He says he calls it a 5 hour window. But that timing, that exact timing isn't set in stone. Maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's 6 hours. But the key is to seize that moment because that's an important time to be able to install those new behaviors.
Yeah. And this is cool.
It is.
So how does this apply to relationships then?
Great question.
And I think we have a couple suggestions.
Great question. So let's bring it home.
Yep.
Neuroplasticity means you're not stuck in old patterns, first and foremost.
Absolutely.
Whatever those things are that you feel like you're just so stuck in, you're not. You know, maybe that's getting defensive, or maybe it's, why do I always shut down during conflict and I lose my words and I can't figure out what to say? You can rewire your brain to respond differently. So here's how we do it. Step 1 is you want to spot that unconscious pattern. So think about what you do automatically in your marriage. Do you get controlling? Do you get defensive, critical, harsh, cold? Maybe you rage like Ernesto, or maybe you shut down and you can't talk at all. We have a whole series that we did several months ago here on the podcast about these unconscious patterns and how to spot them. So then now you want to look at your family history and start asking yourself some really quality questions. I love what Tony Robbins says. He says, it's not that we don't know the right answers. It's that we're not asking the right questions. So look at your family history and think, who did I see doing this growing up? Who did it to me growing up? Or who did I do it to growing up myself and nobody stopped me from doing it?
Yeah, again, I want to go back to that learning at the feet of the masters, right? Sharla learned all of her maybe not so great aspects about relationships. Less resourceful behaviors from her mom. I learned a lot of less resourceful behaviors from my parents. And so and our gut reaction to these questions might in the past been to say like, hey, I had a perfect family. Like, don't pick on my family. Like maybe you did and maybe you didn't, but that's the implicit stuff that we don't always see. I think we just need to dig a little deeper, especially as we're maybe reacting in conflict or reacting rapidly. We need to ask ourselves, maybe it's a good time to just evaluate and then evolve.
I love it.
And this is one of those steps, right, that will help you evolve your relationship.
And then step 2, look for that salient moment. So this could be in a coaching session or in a therapy session. It could be in a deep talk with your partner, your spouse. It could even be in a fight. It could be that moment that you realize, whoa, I don't want to keep doing this. And that shock is your brain's chance to change. That is your opportunity. So for us, we had a big moment. We've shared this many times on the show. For us, it happened during a big argument that we had early in our relationship. And Robert did point out my pattern. He did it calmly. He did it really well. And he pointed out my pattern of being overly critical and harsh. And he told me that he wasn't willing to tolerate it anymore. It wasn't okay for me to continue to do that. And for me, it was that aha moment coupled with that recoil, that emotional charge.
It brought it to your consciousness. You didn't realize that's what you're doing.
Totally.
Right?
Caused me to recoil back and go, no, I don't want to be like that.
Right.
I don't want to do that. That's not the relationship that I want.
And that's a perfect example of one of the skills that we're talking about. Like, how do we do this, right? Step 3, act fast. We know that there's a window of time, whether it's 4 to 6 hours or 5 hours. Just know that there's a window of time when you can lay down new pathways. Neuroplasticity is sort of in this sweet spot. We're reorganizing our synapses. We're reorganizing our neural pathways. And then this means that you should practice this behavior right away. For us, we have to practice calmly talking about our feelings, our needs, right? We had to learn how to do that.
And how to do conflict differently.
Right. And it rewired how we handle stress together. And one thing I want to add is oftentimes, if you've listened to us for a while, we like to give tips. And probably up until this episode, we've said, spend the next week working on these things. And now I'm going to say, sit down and calmly work on this technique and see if you can get it dialed in 5 hours. See if you can remap that. If you're learning something and your partner is willing to have a conversation with you and you have an aha moment, practice that technique. Let's practice our responses and let's take advantage of this neuroplasticity.
Such a good point. What a great tip. And one more tip I'll give before we wrap up is to give each other grace and to be patient. Yes, my brain healed pretty fast, maybe a month, with oxygen therapy. And in relationships, however, that change might take a little bit more repetition. It might take more than a month.
A little bit.
The science says, of course, small, consistent actions. That's what we talk about at the end of every episode. Small, consistent actions. Maybe it's just practicing saying, I'm sorry, I messed up. Let me try that again. Or maybe it's, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel this way. Is there anything that I can do to make you feel better? So it's these little actions that we continue to practice that strengthens these new pathways over time.
I love the term strengthens these new pathways, because once you lay down the new neural pathways, you need to use them.
Yeah. Practice.
Right. So think about this neural pathway as a path through the tall grass. And if you walk it once and then you don't do it, that path is just going to grow back and you're never going to see it. You won't be able to find your way back.
Oh, that's good.
But if you walk it a couple of times, then you've, sort of created this pathway and you're strengthening this neural network.
That's really good.
Right. And that's
I love that.
Right. Just keep working on showing up differently, striving to be a better version of yourself every day for your marriage. Continue to evaluate and evolve.
I love that. My recovery has really taught me how resilient we really are and how we can tap into that resilience every day to build a more loving and connected relationship. Did I do okay today?
No, you did
Did I mess
great.
up too many words?
No, I think you did great.
Okay, good.
We'll fix it in editing and they won't even know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's been 3 weeks.
Almost a month.
Yeah, almost a month, 3 weeks, a month since we had that. But we've learned a powerful lesson about change. We've learned a powerful lesson about neuroplasticity and how amazing this human body is. And I'm so proud of you for just sticking with us and just coming through it. And I'm excited for our listeners to try out some of these new ideas.
Yeah.
And and thank you for being the model for us.
Well, I don't want to say I did it on purpose. I would not intentionally want to do that again, but it was some good learning for sure. So to wrap up, your brain is wired to adapt. It is resilient, whether it's healing from an injury like mine is right now or rewiring old habits in your marriage. We can do it. We've given you a framework today. Make the unconscious conscious. Use those recoil, emotionally charged moments to make change happen even faster. So try it out, reflect on your own patterns, have an honest talk with your partner, and practice those new behaviors right away in 5 hours, like Robert said.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear from you, both just either on the podcast or on social media. Share your stories of change, or let us know how these tips might work in your marriage. And if you found this episode helpful, please leave us a 5-star review, share it with someone who might benefit it. And if you have suggestions for any topics or ways that we can improve the show, please email us at masteryourmarriage@gmail.com.
We're so grateful to be back with you all.
Absolutely.
Keep growing, keep loving, keep rewiring those brain pathways. Remember, it's the small things done often that create the biggest impact.